وممن ذكر ذلك أيضا الإمام أبو الحسن شيث بن إبراهيم المالكي. And amongst those who mentioned that also, what's that? That is that the Mu'tazilah said Allah had power over the movements and stillnesses of his slaves until he gave them power over it. And then once he gave them power over it, he became powerless over it. So we mentioned a number of scholars who cited that about the Mu'tazilah, who documented that that's their creed. Even if some Mu'tazili fanboys would deny that they said that, claiming that they didn't find it in any of their works, we say it suffices us that the trustworthy, reliable Sunni scholars documented that about them. They didn't have a reason to lie on them. They already had plenty to refute them with. They didn't need to make up something. They weren't liars anyway. And amongst those who said that was this scholar we just named, Imam Abu al-Hasan, whose name is Sheith ibn Ibrahim the Maliki. في كتابه الذي ألفه في الرد على المعتزلة. In his book that he authored in refutation of the Mu'tazilah, حتى قال إنهم جعلوا الله كما يقول المثل. He even said that they made Allah like what's in the proverb, أدخلته داري فأخرجني منها. I admitted him into my house and he kicked me out of it. Subhanallah. That reminds me, you know, the Flintstones cartoon, you know, and when it comes on, and then Fred Flintstone goes in the house, he puts the dinosaur out of the house, and then the dinosaur hops in the window and he kicks Fred out. وقد قدمنا أنه ليس كل معتزلي يعتقد جميع مقالاتهم. We have already presented that not every Mu'tazili believes in all of their sayings. بل منهم من يقول ببعضها. Rather, some of them say only some of what the Mu'tazila say. ولا يقول ببعض. And they don't say some of what the Mu'tazila say. Some other things that they say. فإذا كفرناهم فلا نعني تكفير كل من ينتسب إلى الاعتزال. So when we deem the Mu'tazila as blasphemers, as disbelievers, when we make the broad statement that the Mu'tazila are kuffar, we do not mean to deem as blasphemers every individual who is affiliated with the way of i'tizal. I'tizal is the name of the Mu'tazila way. The name of their madhab is i'tizal because they are the Mu'tazila. Just like the way of the Shiites is called tashayyur. Tashayyur. Because it's called tashayyur because they are the Shia and other things like that. These different schools have names. These different creeds have names. So the creed or the school of the Mu'tazila is called i'tizal. I'tizal. I'll spell it out for you right here. I'tizal. I'tizal. The Shaykh said, when we make the broad statement of deeming the Mu'tazila as disbelievers, we don't mean to deem as disbelievers every individual who is affiliated with i'tizal. إنما نعني من ثبتت في حقه قضية معينة تقتضي تكفيره كهذه المسألة. We only mean anyone about whom a particular judgment that demands charging him with blasphemy is confirmed. Like this case of saying that God had power over the movements and stillnesses of his slaves until he gave them the power over it, and then he became powerless over it. فيتلخص بما ذكرنا أن إطلاق القول بأن المعتزلة لا يكفرون خلاف الصواب. And so the synopsis from what we have mentioned is that generally saying, broadly saying that the Mu'tazila don't blaspheme, that they are not disbelievers, is incorrect. He said, where did you write the name of Mu'tazila? On my screen, if you can see my screen, I'm sharing with you. وَقَدْ أَسَاءَ مَنْ أَطْلَقَ ذَلِكَ. And anyone who did say such an open and broad statement that the Mu'tazila don't disbelieve, he was wrong and he did bad. كقول بعض المتأخرين في منظومة له. Like what some of the latter day figures, some later ones who are regarded as scholars, said in some poetry of his. He says, وَمَنْ يَقُلْ بِالطَّبْعِ أَوْ بِالْعِلَّةِ فذاك كفر عند أهل الملة ومن يقل بالقوة المودعة فذاك بدعي فلا تلتفتي. It means anyone who says, meaning anyone who believes in at-tab', that things happen by nature, not by God's creating, or by God being the reason for their existence. فَذَاكَ كُفْرٌ عِنْدَ أَهْلِ الْمِلَّةِ. That is blasphemy according to the people of the religion. Shaykh says this is true. And anyone who says, and anyone who believes in the installed power, they mean that God granted the slaves power over their own movements and stillnesses, but they mean the power to create. So he says, and anyone who believes in the installed power, then he's merely a heretic, a non-blasphemous heretic. At most, he's a heretic, is what he's saying, not a kafir altogether. فَلَا تَلْتَفِتِي. So don't give any regard. فَإِنَّهُ كفر القائلين بأن حدوث الأشياء بالطبع لا بخلق الله وإيجاده. This speaker deemed as a blasphemer those who believe that things happening is by nature and not by God's creating, and not by God's not by God's creating. والقائلين بأن الأشياء توجد لأن وجود الله اقتضى وجودها لا بإرادته وفعله. And he also deems as a kafir anyone who believes that things exist because God exists, that God's existence dictated their existence, and not by God's will and not by God's doing. This speaker that we're quoting, that we're citing his lines of poetry, he said this is blasphemy, وَهَذَا حَقٌّ, and this is true. وَلَمْ يُكَفِّرِ الْمُعْتَزِلَةَ الْقَائِلِينَ بِأَنَّ الْعَبْدَ يَخْلُقُ بِقُدْرَةٍ أَوْدَعَهَا اللَّهُ فِيهِ. But he did not deem as a blasphemer whoever believes that slaves create by a power that God installed in them. وَهَذِهِ مَقَالَةٌ شَنِيعَةٌ مَرْدُودَةٌ. And this is an abominable statement and rejected. لَا يُلْتَفَتُ إِلَيْهَا. It is regardless. It has no regard. كيف وقد أشركوا العبد مع الله في صفة الخلق. How could it have any regard when they have made the slave share with God in the attribute of creating? A إبراز المعدوم من العدم إلى الوجود, meaning the attribute of raising the non-existent from nothingness into existence. So to remind you, Shaykh says this is the meaning that they confirm for Allah and for the slaves, and therefore it's blasphemy and shirk, and that's correct. What do some people say? They say no, when they attribute creating to Allah, they mean a different meaning, because they mean that they create by tools and by limbs, whereas Allah creates without tools and without limbs. He creates by mere will, and the slaves don't create by mere will, rather they create by engagement and contact. So the answer to that is, whether you want to regard their talk about tools and limbs or not, there is something that they say that they share with Allah, which is raising the non-existent into being. The Sunni Muslims don't believe like that. The Sunni Muslims believe merely that the slaves can manipulate the world around them. That's all. Not that they can create anything. They're manipulating what's around them, like to take a rock and then take a piece of metal and then to hit the rock with the metal and break the rock. And then, with another piece of metal to just chisel away at the rock, smaller pieces, so to make a more refined shape. And then to make some form or shape out of this rock. This is not creating, because the slave didn't create the metal, and he didn't create the rock, and he didn't create his movement, and he didn't create the impact of the metal on the rock, and he didn't create the shape of the rock, etc., etc. He didn't create anything. والخلق بهذا المعنى أظهر خصائص الألوهية. And creating by this meaning, the meaning of bringing something from nothingness, is the clearest specialty of godhood. حتى قال الإمام أبو الحسن الأشعري في تفسير معنى الإله: Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari even said, when explaining the meaning of God, al-uluhiyyatu qudratu ikhtira'i al-a'yani wa qudratu ikhtira'i al-muhdathat. He said godhood is the power to create volume. Godhood is the power to create volume and the power to create events or occurrences. وَلَيْسَ فِي كَلَامِ التفتزاني تصريح بتكفير المعتزلة أو ترك تكفيرهم. And in the talk of At-Taftazani that we mentioned last time, there is no explicit charge of blasphemy against the Mu'tazila, nor is there the refusal to charge them, an explicit refusal to charge them with blasphemy. إنما نفى عنهم الشرك. Merely what's there is that he denied that they are pagans. His denying that they're pagans doesn't mean that he's saying they're not kuffar. He's just saying they didn't commit this type of kufr. ولا يلزم من ذلك أنه نفى عنهم الكفر. And it's not binding from this that At-Taftazani denies blasphemy about them altogether. لأن الكفر قسمان, because there are two types of blasphemy. كفر إشراك وكفر جحود وتكذيب. ما شاء الله ما شاء الله. Blasphemy of paganism and blasphemy of denial and contradiction. Subhanallah. Someone was just asking me yesterday about denial and contradiction in terms of blasphemy. And he's wondering if they are the same thing. Here, Shaykh put them in one category. The blasphemy of juhud, denial with knowledge, and takdhib, contradicting. But if you want to be meticulous, juhud and takdhib, each one has its own meaning. Because denial of knowledge, that means, to deny something while knowing it's true. That's one meaning. Takdhib means contradicting. That means saying contrary to something else. That doesn't necessarily mean that you denied it while you knew it was true. Not necessarily. But these two, they do cross paths. The denial of knowledge and contradiction, they do cross paths. But doesn't mean they mean exactly 100% the same thing. It is very important for comprehension that you can detect the difference between two things that are close. Just like it's important that you can tell when two things mean the same thing, although they're worded differently. That's one thing. Another thing, this is a very nice statement here from the Shaykh. In As-Sirat al-Mustaqim, the Shaykh says, there's two types of blasphemy. The Shaykh categorized blasphemy in different ways. In one of the ways he categorized blasphemy in the Sirat, he said there's two types. Kufr that's shirk and kufr that's not shirk. Kufr that is shirk and kufr that's not shirk. That's what he said there. Right here, he says something that has more details. He says there's two types of blasphemy. Kufr that's shirk and kufr that is denial with knowledge and contradicting. So add that to your knowledge. Add that to your Sirat notes, if you have notes in As-Sirat al-Mustaqim. قال التفتزاني. التفتزاني said, إلا أن مشايخ ما وراء النهر قد بالغوا في تضليلهم في هذه المسألة. However, the sheikhs beyond the river of Jayhun, have been hyperbolic about deeming the Mu'tazilah as misguided in this case. حتى قالوا إن المجوسي أسعد حالا منهم حيث لم يثبتوا إلا شريكا واحدا والمعتزلة أثبتوا شركاء لا تحصى. At-Taftazani said they went to the extent that they said, they were so emphatic here or hyperbolic here that they said that the Majusi has a lighter situation than the Mu'tazila do. Because the Majusi confirms only one partner for God, while the Mu'tazila confirm unlimited or uncountable partners for God. Intaha, end quote. Shaykh says, rahimahullah, أقول, I say, وهذا الكلام الصحيح صحيح في وصف المعتزلة. This talk is correct about the description of the Mu'tazilah. Shaykh saying, I agree with the scholars from beyond the river of Jayhun, those Maturidis. That's right. وَلَا يَنْفَعُهُمْ قَوْلُهُمُ الْعِبَادُ يَخْلُقُونَ أَفْعَالَهُمْ بِقُدْرَةٍ أَعْطَاهُمُ اللَّهُ إِيَّاهَا. And saying that Allah creates, and they're saying that the slaves create their own actions by a power granted to them by God doesn't help them. فَالْمَاتُرِيدِيَّةُ أَهْلُ مَا وَرَاءَ النَّهْرِ. The Maturidis are the people beyond the river. لَا يُنْتَقَدُونَ عَلَى هَذَا. They are not to be criticized for this. This statement of theirs doesn't warrant any negative criticism. لأنهم أي المعتزلة جعلوا الله عاجزا بعد أن كان قادرا. Because the Mu'tazilah have made Allah weak, crippled, after deeming him powerful. فهم بهذا الاعتبار أخبث حالا من المجوس. So they are, by this regard, by this consideration, yani from this angle or this point of view, having a worse situation than the Majus. When he said it like that, means if you want to look from another perspective, maybe you could find a way to say that the Majus are worse than the Mu'tazilah. But in this way, from this angle, the Mu'tazilah are worse than the Majus. جَعَلُوا الْعَبْدَ أَقْوَى مِنَ اللَّهِ. They made the slave stronger than God. لأن العبد غلبه بعدما أخذ القدرة على أفعاله. Because according to them, the slave overcame God, defeated God after he took the power over his own actions. وصار أقوى منه على قولهم. The slave became more powerful than God, according to what the Mu'tazilah said. Because they literally said God had the power over the slaves' deeds until he gave it to the slaves. Then he became powerless over their deeds. And also the Mu'tazilah say Allah willed for everyone to be a believer, but some of the slaves chose not to believe. So that means that Allah has defeated. That's the creed of Mu'tazilah. Subhanallah, very ugly creed. That's not monotheism. That's why some of the scholars said Al-Mu'tazilatu Zanadiqah or Al-Qadariyatu Zanadiqah. They said the Mu'tazilah or the destiny deniers are irreligious. Irreligious. What do you think someone believes like this? He's going to be praying all day and fasting all day and giving charity and fearing his Lord? Not at all. Rather, he's going to be an argumentative troll. It's going to be a troll. فالله تعالى لا يستطيع عندهم أن يخلق تلك الأشياء التي صار العبد قادرا عليها. And so Allah Ta'ala, according to them, is not able to create those things that the slave has power over. ويجب التحذير من المعتزلة وعقيدتهم. It is obligatory. Warning from the Mu'tazilah and their conviction is obligatory. قال ابن المبارك في ذم بعض أشخاص من المعتزلة وغيرهم. Ibn al-Mubarak said in dispraising some people, some Mu'tazila people as well as some others. أيها الطالب علما أيها الطالب علما إيتي حماد بن زيد واطلبن العلم منه ثم قيده بقيدي لا كجهم لا كثور لا كعمرو بن عبيد. O student of knowledge, O seeker of knowledge, go to Hamad ibn Zayd and seek the knowledge from him, and then write it down. Then trap it with the trap, or tie it with the tie. That means write it down, record it, so that you can have it for later. Not like Jahm, not like Thawr, and not like Amr ibn Ubaid. Amma Jahm. Now concerning Jahm, فهو ابن صفوان. He is Jahm ibn Safwan, Za'im al-Jahmiyyah, leader of the Jahmites. That's who the Wahhabis call us, Jahmiyyah. Because one of the creeds of the Jahmiyyah is the denial of God's attributes. So when we don't take his attributes literally, according to them, we are deniers of his attributes, and so we are Jahmiyyah. They took that from Ibn Taymiyyah. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ مُعْتَزِلِيًّا. He was not a Mu'tazili. قَتَلَهُ سَلْمُ ibn Ahwaz. Salm ibn Ahwaz killed him. وَأَمَّا عَمْرُ ibn Ubaid. As for Amr ibn Ubaid, فَهُوَ مِنْ رُؤُوسِ الْمُعْتَزِلَةِ الْمُتَقَدِّمِينَ. He is one of the early leaders of the Mu'tazila. He was the henchman of Wasil. And Wasil, he is the Shaykh of the Mu'tazila. Wasil, he's the one that Al-Hasan al-Bisri kicked out of his session. So they got kicked out. They therefore became outcasts. And so they were called the Mu'tazila. This Amr ibn Ubaid was Wasil's henchman. He carried on Wasil's work after him. Amma Thawr فَكَانَ عَلَى الْحَاشِيَةِ. As for this man Thawr, footnote says, he is Thawr ibn Yazid al-Kula'i, Abu Khalid, who died in the year 153 after the Hijrah. Al-Awza'i used to speak against him. He was in Hims. That's in Syria. And then its people exiled him. And they burned his house down because of his talk about destiny. And when he came to Medina, Malik forbade anyone from sitting with him. So Shaykh says, as for Thawr, فَكَانَ عَلَى الْحَاشِيَةِ. He was on the edge. The footnote says means he was not deep into i'tizal. So you know what i'tizal means now. Got to add that to your vocabulary. Because if you just learned that word today, then maybe you forgot it that quick. Because that's how so many of us are. So that's why you have to study and review and repeat, so those things will stick to your heart. كان فيه شيء من بدعة المعتزلة. He had some of the heresy of the Mu'tazila. وهؤلاء ثلاثة منحرفون عن عقيدة أهل الحق. And those three, all of them, are deviated from the creed of the people of the truth. وأشدهم ضلالا هو جهم. And the worst of them, the most misguided of them, is Jahm, who was also an insurrectionist. He was a militant, and he used to stay strapped. He was a radical. وتعلقت المعتزلة بشبهة هي أقوى شبههم. And the Mu'tazila have clung to a fallacy. It is the strongest of their fallacies. قالوا, they said, لو كان الله تعالى خالق كل أفعال العباد. Had God, exalted is He, been creator of all actions of the slaves, لبطلت فائدة التكليف. Then the point of being accountable would be nullified. وَالْمَدْحِ وَالذَّمِّ وَالثَّوَابِ وَالْعِقَابِ. And being praiseworthy or blameworthy and reward and punishment would all be pointless. And they're saying, this means God forces us to do everything we do. We are like feathers in the wind. So that means nothing matters. قالوا وهذا ظاهر. They said, and this is obvious. They're saying this is obvious is like saying, don't be silly to try to challenge this. It's like they're saying this is a given. والجواب أن ذلك إنما يتوجه على الجبرية. And the answer is to say that this talk is only directed towards the Jabriya. القائلين بنفي الكسب والاختيار أصلا. Those who believe in negating that slaves acquire any actions and negating that slaves have any choice fundamentally. وَأَمَّا نَحْنُ فَنُثْبِتُهُ عَلَى مَا أَثْبَتَهُ أَهْلُ السُّنَّةِ. But as for us, we confirm this. We confirm that the slaves acquire their deeds, and we confirm that they have a choice to act, just as the people of the prophetic way have done. أي على أنه كسب للعبد. Meaning, we confirm that the deeds of the slaves are an acquisition of theirs. من دون أن يكون مخلوقا له. It's an acquisition of his without being a creation of his. An acquisition of the man-slave. His chosen act, the man-slave's chosen act is an acquisition of his and not a creation of his. فَلَا يَلْزَمُنَا مَا قَالَتِ الْمُعْتَزِلَةِ. Therefore, what the Mu'tazila said is non-binding on us. وَقَدْ يَتَمَسَّكُ أَغْبِيَاءُ الْمُعْتَزِلَةِ بِأَنَّهُ تَعَالَى لَوْ كَانَ خَالِقًا لِأَفْعَالِ الْعِبَادِ لكان هو القائم والقاعد والآكل والشارب والزاني والسارق إلى غير ذلك. And some of the dumber Mu'tazila, some of the more moronic amongst the Mu'tazila might cling to the argument that had God been creator of the deeds of the slaves, then God would be the one who stands up and sits down. He would be the stander and the sitter and the eater and the drinker and the fornicator and the thief, etc. وَهَذَا جَهْلٌ عَظِيمٌ مِنَ الْمُعْتَزِلَةِ. And this is great ignorance from the Mu'tazila. لِأَنَّ الْمُتَّصِفَ بِالشَّيْءِ مَنْ قَامَ بِهِ مَنْ قَامَ بِهِ ذَلِكَ الشَّيْء. Yes. Because the one who's attributed with something is the one for whom that thing is confirmed. Is the one for whom that thing is confirmed. لَا مَنْ أَوْجَدَهُ. Not the one who created it. That's different. It means, the meaning of this talk is, like what we learned before, if you give a descriptive name to anyone, if you describe anyone or anything with a descriptive name, an adjective, then that's only valid if the attribute that confirms that descriptive name is confirmed for the one you're describing. So it's not valid to say, had Allah been the creator of the deeds of his man-slaves, then he would be the stander, and he would be the sitter, and he would be the eater. That's not valid. Because the stander is the one, what does it mean, the stander? It means the one attributed with standing. Does not mean the one attributed with creating standing in someone else. What does sitter mean? Means the one attributed with sitting. Does not mean the one attributed with creating sitting in someone else, etc. What does eater mean? The one attributed with eating, not the one who creates eating in someone else, the act of eating in someone else. أَوَلَا يَرَوْنَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى هُوَ الْخَالِقُ لِلسَّوَادِ وَالْبَيَاضِ. Do they not see that God, exalted is He is the creator of blackness and of whiteness, وَسَائِرِ الصِّفَاتِ فِي الْأَجْسَامِ, and the creator of all the other attributes in the bodies, وَلَا يَتَّصِفُ بِذَلِكَ, and despite that, he's not attributed with those attributes because he is their creator. So why would they be inconsistent? فَاللَّهُ تَعَالَى هُوَ خَلَقَ السَّوَادِ. And so God, exalted is He. It is He who created blackness. وَلَا يَلْزَمُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ أَنْ يَكُونَ هُوَ أَسْوَدَ. And it's not binding from that He would be black. كَذَلِكَ خَلَقَ فِي الْعَبْدِ الْحَرَكَةَ وَالسُّكُونَ وَالْخَيْرَ وَالشَّرَّ. And likewise, He created in the slave movement and stillness and good and evil. فَلَا يَكُونُ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى هُوَ الْمُتَّصِفُ بِتِلْكَ الصِّفَاتِ. And so, He, the glorified and exalted, would not be attributed with those attributes. It wouldn't be said that because He creates movement in His slaves, that He's moving, and that because He creates stillness in His slaves, that He's motionless. التي يوصف بها هذا العبد. Allah would not be attributed with these attributes that the slave has because He created those attributes in the slave. وقد تتمسك المعتزلة بقوله تعالى. And the Mu'tazila might also cling to what God said, exalted is He. فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. The 14th verse of Surah Al-Mu'minun, it means, glorified is Allah. If you translate it, the way a Mu'tazili would, then you'd say, glorified is Allah, the best of creators. وَقَوْلِهِ, and also they might hold fast to this other verse, which is the 110th verse of Surah Al-Ma'idah. وَإِذْ تَخْلُقُ مِنَ الطِّينِ كَهَيْئَةِ الطَّيْرِ. And when you, they would say, and when you, O Jesus, create from clay something that has the form of a flying creature, which is a bat. That refers to one of the miracles of Jesus, as you know. So they would say, here, the best of creators, Khaliq, Ahsanul Khaliqeen. So He's a creator, and others are creators. And they would say, look, Jesus created from the clay something with the form of a bird. It was a bat. فَالْجَوَابِ, the answer is, أن الخلق في الآية الأولى بمعنى التقدير, is that khalq in the first verse has the meaning of taqdir, ay ahsanul muqaddirin. I'm going to come back to this just in a moment. Let me keep reading first and then I'll come back so I can explain the word taqdir here. وفي الثانية بمعنى التصوير, and khalq in the second verse has the meaning of forming or molding. So we're not going to say here creating in the first verse means taqdir, and creating in the second verse means molding. We're going to say khalq in the first verse means taqdir, and khalq in the second verse means taswir, forming or molding or depicting. So what does it mean to say ahsanul khaliqin means ahsanul muqaddirin? The best of khaliqs means the best of muqaddirs. Yes, so this word khalq in Arabic, this word khalq in Arabic has numerous meanings. One of its meanings is taqdir. Yani, let me say this way. In this ayah, ahsanul khaliqin, which means the best of khaliqs. If one wanted to translate it this way, best of khaliqs. We have to find a meaning for khalq that works for Allah and for the creations. And fits the ayah, of course. A meaning that fits this ayah and it works for God and it works for His creations, but has to mean something different for God than it means for the creations. One word that can be used for God and can be used for the creations and fits in this ayah, but still means something when it is used for God and something else when it's used for creations. So what's that? It's this one, taqdir. Taqdir, when used for God, means tadbir. That means managing or management. And taqdir, when used for creation, means estimating and measuring. So, does the Creator have a taqdir? The answer is yes. Do the creations have a taqdir? The answer is yes. Do those mean the same thing? The answer is no. Okay. Is there another word for taqdir? The answer is yes. Which is what? Khalq. Khalq? Yes, khalq. So then when khalq is used for the Creator, it means something, which is bringing things from non-existence into being. And when used for creations, means something else. In this case, means estimating. And khalq for the Creator in this case means managing and His predestining. His managing, His predestining, His making everything as it is, His making something happen before something else, or making something happen after something else, or His putting something above something else, or below something else, or in front of something else, or behind something else. This is His management. And it's always right. And the taqdir of the creations is their measurement and their estimation, which could be right or could be wrong. So that's the meaning of the ayah. Shaykh says, rahimahullah, فَمَعْنَا إِذْ تَخْلُقُ أي تُصَوِّرُ. So the meaning of when you, O Jesus, takhluq, is when you, O Jesus, tusawwir, meaning when you form, when you mold. Anta ya Isa. Min at-tini kahay'ati at-tayr, from the clay, something with the form of a flying creature. وَالْكَلَامُ فِي الْخَلْقِ بِمَعْنَى الْإِحْدَاثِ مِنَ الْعَدَمِ. And the discussion here is not, the discussion here is khalq with the meaning of creating an event from nothingness. لا في الخلق بمعنى التقدير والتصوير. Not khalq with the meaning of management and molding, or not khalq with the meaning of estimating and molding. فائدة, benefit. روى اللالكائي عن الإمام مالك أنه سئل عن نكاح القدر وتزويجه. Al-Lalikai narrated from or about Imam Malik that he was asked about giving a Muslimah in marriage to a destiny denier. Faqal. And so he cited the verse of the Quran to make an insinuation. وَلَعَبْدٌ مُؤْمِنٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكٍ. And by God, a believing slave is better than a pagan. Yeah. But this book of Al-Lalikai, you can't get that book and be a Wahhabi. It's going to encourage you. If you're a Wahhabi, this book will encourage you. SharH Usul I'tiqadi Ahli Sunnah. Subhanallah. And one brother, subhanallah, he has good belief. He has right belief. He has right Aqidat, this brother. He got his hands on Al-Lalikai's book. He was so impressed, so impressed. It's like, man, this book is, he said, this man's a gun. Yani, he is a gun, but as they say. But he was like, this book is like so incredible. Then I looked in there, and it's full, so many mutashabi texts in there. So many mutashabi texts. And in the beginning, too. So I wasn't impressed with his book. That's not to say he's a deviant, but that's what he did. So the brother, he was expecting me to say, yeah, man, yeah, this is amazing. But I didn't share his sentiments. I didn't show it also. It's important, Yani, don't kiss up to a person. I didn't show him yeah, no, I didn't make a face. I didn't nod my head. No, I didn't. So he brought the subject up another time and another time until he was like, what's up with you in this book? So I explained to him. I said, what is this here? All this here, this here, this here. Why he didn't start with Kan Allahu wa lam yakun shay'un ghayruhu? Why he didn't start with Allah exists, Allah has no beginning, Allah has no need, etc. So then he said, okay, I see. But anyway, Ahlul Sunnah, they cite this book. But yani, I'm just telling you that just in case someone's going to bring you Lalikai's book, and then you say, well, we heard about Lalikai. What's going on here? قال ابن العربي المالكي. Ibn al-Arabi, the Maliki, said, الصريح من أقوال مالك تكفير من أنكر القدر. What is explicit from the sayings of Malik is deeming as a blasphemer anyone who denies destiny. حيث سئل عن نكاحهم فذكر الآية. Because he was asked about giving a Muslimah in marriage to one of them. And then he cited this verse. So it became clear for me through translating Haythu sometimes going to mean because. Haythu usually means where. It's going to mean sometimes because. He cited the ayah because Malik, when he was asked about that, he cited this ayah. وَلَعَبْدٌ مُؤْمِنٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكٍ. By God, a believing slave is better than a pagan. That's 221st verse of Surah Al-Baqarah. وَمَنْ حَكَى فِي ذَلِكَ غَيْرَ مَا أَوْرَدْنَاهُ فَذَلِكَ لِضَعْفِ مَعْرِفَتِهِ بِالْأُصُولِ. And anyone who cites concerning this other than what we have produced, meaning he cites something to debunk what we're saying or to be contrary to what we're saying, then that is because of his weak familiarity with the fundamentals. فَلَا يُنَاكَحُوا وَلَا يُصَلَّ عَلَيْهِمْ. For indeed, they are not given Muslim women for marriage, and they are not prayed upon or prayed over. They are not prayed over when they die. فَإِنْ خِيفَ عَلَيْهِمُ الضَّيْعَةُ دُفِنُوا كَمَا يُدْفَنُ الْكَلْبُ. And if there is concern about basically he's saying if there's concern about their dead bodies, then they would be buried like a dog. Yani, not buried like a believer, not buried like someone who has to be buried. It's an obligation to bury him, but they rather would be buried like a dog. فَلَا يُؤْذَى بِجَوَارِهِ Muslim, so that no Muslim would be harmed by the stench of their rotting corpses. وَإِنْ قَدَرَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْإِمَامِ اسْتَتَابَهُمْ. And if the caliph gets his hand on them, if he arrests them, he must demand their repentance. فَإِنْ تَابُوا وَإِلَّا قَتَلَهُمْ كُفْرًا. So if they repent, then so be it, or else he executes them for blasphemy. Intaha, end quote. What he's saying is, they have the judgment of apostates. All right. So we need to check Lalikai's book just to be sure where the quotes start and stop. Here. So here, let me show you what it looks like, or what appears. That Al-Lalikai is reporting about Malik, that he was asked about giving a Muslimah in marriage to a Qadari. So he cited the ayah to insinuate that they are pagans. And then, looks like Al-Lalikai then cites Ibn al-Arabi, not that Al-Lalikai's quote is done, rather that he then cites Ibn al-Arabi, and that Ibn al-Arabi said all of what we just said. Until he finished Ibn al-Arabi's statement, and so he said, Intaha, end quote. And then he continues. So he says, Qultu, I say, هذا الذي قاله مالك فيما رواه ابن المنذر. This is what Malik said in what Ibn al-Munzir reported about him. قال, he said, أرى أن يستتابوا. I see that they should be, that their repentance should be demanded. Their retraction from blasphemy. فَإِن تَابُوا وَإِلَّا ضُرِبَتْ أَعْنَاقُهُمْ. So if they repent, then so be it. And if not, then they should be beheaded. Intaha, end quote. Now, looks like that's the end of the whole quote of Al-Lalikai. طيب, let's stop there. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.